Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for participating in this conference. I would be at your service, and any questions you may have, I would be grateful if you raise it with us, and I will try my best to respond. As you may know, my name is Dowlat Nowrouzi. I represent the National Council of Resistance of Iran in the UK. Today's discussion would be about the continuation of the Iranian regime's Quds Force and other agencies in the Middle East, particularly now in Yemen, and of course, as many of you may have known, in Iraq, Syria, Palestine, and many countries in the Middle East. One of my major concerns of trying to spread the word and my message is actually what the Iranian regime has been engaged in the past 12 years trying to spread the fundamentalism and in a way secretly occupying or interfering in various affairs in the Middle East countries is not because it is a very powerful regime that wants to pretend as if it is a superpower in the Middle East, especially after the collapse of Soviet Union, but rather it is out of its absolute weakness. And in my view, again, trying to find out what is the main root of this weakness, you have to look for it in extensive demonstrations and protests, huge discontent amongst all Iranians. It is some 36 years that this regime occupied our country, Iran, hijacked its revolution since 1979, misused Islam, took advantage of religious sentiment of Iranian people, and in the absence of the major opposition movement, democratic opposition movement of the Mujahideen, the PMOI, and the Fedayeen organization, who were imprisoned by Shah Savak agent those years, it took the most advantage in order to be able to usurp power and divert the course of revolution instead of democracy to something that they created, and they called it theocracy or the Islamic Republic. So it was the first country in the Middle East that in the name of Islam tried to grasp power, political power, of a very strategic, important country in the whole of Middle East. But ever since, this regime, with knowing its nature, which is a real anti-human, retrogressive regime, rather than fulfilling the Iranian people's major aspiration to achieve democracy, human rights, equality, progress, and development. In return, it got our country engaged in war with Iraq that they prolonged it for 8 years. As a result, over 2 million Iranians killed, wounded, or handicapped, and over 3 to 4 million refugee and homeless, and some 2,000 cities, villages destroyed only in the Iranian side. Rafsanjani later on, as Khomeini's most close official and favorite one, said that some $1,000 billion was the economic and physical loss as a result of that anti-nationalistic war. Now, that reign of terror did not end with the Iranians. We, as the prime victim of this terrible religious dictatorship, fundamentalism, fanaticism, extremism in the name of Islam, have a good experience that how the mullahs, after they failed in order to destroy the opposition movement in Iran that rose firm against this very brutal regime, to say that none of these crimes committed in the name of Islam had anything to do with Islam, but that they were misuses of a very brutal extremist regime that wanted to stay in power and preserve its system, no matter what price the Iranian people had to pay. Now, they are expanding it, they are exporting it to other countries in the Middle East in order to cover up the looming crisis and increase of tension, discontent, public protest throughout Iran. In the last several weeks, we have witnessed engagement of millions of our teachers, the academic sector, as well as millions of students and our youngsters, as well as millions of workers demanding their rights because of social, political, and economic crisis that has spread throughout Iran because of this regime's corruption and the use of Iranian people's national wealth, the oil money, the gas money, in trying to finance their support for terrorist groups, as well as sponsoring fundamentalism and the spread of fanaticism in different Middle East Islamic countries, Muslim countries. So we want to warn the world community, particularly through the media, through the social network, and through the internet. We want to share with them the experience of Iranian people, particularly the opposition movement, the Mujahideen, the National Liberation Army of Iran, the National Council of Resistance of Iran as a political coalition of this movement, that what happened in Iran, how we were able to challenge the mullahs, what are the solutions that both the Iranian people as well as the international community, particularly the regional powers, can defeat this very ominous phenomena of Islamic fundamentalism and the terrorism which is emancipated from this phenomenon, and that how hopefully we could all be united in this fight and challenge this regime and defeat it. I'm very grateful for all your participation in today's conference, and I am ready to respond to any questions you may have, and of course also share with you the latest developments in regards to the Iranian regime's interferences in Yemen, and particularly their reaction towards the Decisive Storm coalition and operation led by Saudi Arabia and other Arabic countries in the Gulf, Persian Gulf region, as well as including Pakistan and Turkey supporting it and backing it up. And of course, the world community supporting it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nowrouzi, for your introduction. The first question that we have received is from Italian news agency ANSA. The question is, how do you assess the nuclear agreement between Iran and international community?
In my view, it is obvious that it is a failure. In my view, it is obvious that the West is wasting its time, because the Iranian regime is not the party that really would be committed to hollow promises it makes. And ever since, after the Lausanne Agreement, when Javad Zarif went back to Iran, the top leaders, Khamenei himself as the supreme leader of the mullahs and other officials, have rejected a lot of the terms and the points mentioned in the United States fact sheet and in the agreement that was made and publicized in the United States and by many world news agencies. So I think it is not a regime to be accountable for the promises it makes. And in my view, under that circumstances, it is clear that the regime does not have the intention of being transparent, does not have the intention of giving up its secret nuclear program, And so far that this would be the case, in my view, it is a big threat and danger to the world community, to the national interest of the Iranian people, as well as stability, peace, and security of the regional countries as well as the world community. So in my view, the world community must be very alarmed. The real agreement should be the Iranian regime accepting to implement the 4 resolutions passed by the UN Security Council, which would include the halt in its enrichment of uranium. It will include in accepting the additional protocol, which would allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to have its observations and investigations and inspections over all suspected sites. And this is very fair because it is a regime that for over 20 years has been involved in secret nuclear program, and if it was not for the opposition movement, the National Council of Resistance, that exposed it first time in 2002, the 2 strategic nuclear sites, Natanz for enrichment of uranium and Arak for the production of heavy water, then the world community would not have been aware or informed in any way about the Iranian regime's secret nuclear program. So what the world is demanding must be very decisively pressuring this regime to come to its knees and accept all these protocols as well as the resolution. And in my view, imposing sanctions, much harsher sanctions, would be the solution to pressure the Iranian regime to come along with these demands.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Nowrouzi. The next question that we have received is from Bill Ringel. The question is, what do you make of Tehran's call for ceasefire in Yemen conflict? Is it a genuine or it is a gimmick?
Well, obviously, I think it is, first of all, the best indication of the Iranian regime's weakness. And they know that they are at this stage in a very complicated situation. The Iranian regime is the main party that has interfered and actually planned this very organized attack in Yemen. And they were the ones behind Houthis, militaristically as well as in terms of strategically, that led their attack against the legitimate government in Yemen. So it is not an impartial, neutral government. Obviously, in my view, such suggestions and plans raised by the Iranian regime is the indication that they have been retreated and that they are trying to somehow create obstacles on the way of decisive storm operation to be able to get or to gain time and then later try to have upper hand in Yemen in terms of meddling and the continuation of the meddling of this regime into the affairs of Arabic countries. And so I think the response given by the Yemeni government and other coalition, in my view, is the right one, and that would be to reject and definitely to say that they have to continue with their aim until they will be able to defeat the enemy.
The next question that we have received is from Ashar Rosat. The question is, can nuclear agreement with Iran, between Iran and the 5+1 countries, save domestic economy?
Obviously not, because I am sure you will agree with me that the faltering, collapsing economic situation in Iran and the infrastructure we have is firstly as a result of corruption within the top government officials in Iran, most of them involved in bribery and skyrocketing, stealing and corruption and plundering Iranian people's wealth, particularly our whole oil installations are in the hands of Revolutionary Guards, the Pasdaran, and most of the money is used by them in order to finance their terror group in the Middle East, especially in Iraq, in Syria, as well as in Yemen and other places. For the last year, some over $30 billion has been spent by that regime in Syria trying to help Bashar Assad dictator in killing the Syrian people. So it is obvious that the economic infrastructure situation in Iran can never be recovered. We need a democratic government that can inclusively involve all various sectors of Iranian society to rebuild that destroyed basis of our economy. We need the rule of law, we need an independent judiciary system, and we need stability in the country. And none of these parameters at the moment, under the rule of repression by this very anti-human, brutal regime, none of them exist. So there is no hope. Even if sanctions are lifted, we have no doubt that vast majority of the money and the cash flow will be used by this regime to finance and support and back up its terrorist groups and network in the Middle East, especially Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and other places, not the Iranian people.
Another question also from Asharq al-Awsat, this is on Yemen. Do you think Iran will retreat in Yemen?
I am sure that if the decisive storm operation will continue, and I am sure if there is this unity and this united front, it would definitely and it can surrender the Iranian regime. They are forced to step back. We know and we have learned through many years of our movement opposing this regime's repression, continuous, systematic, brutal aggression is only the language of firmness, decisiveness, and also power. In addition, I think it is essential for this coalition of the Arab nations to understand that if the core of the problem in the Middle East, the main source and the center of Islamic fundamentalism, misuse of Islam, and the terrorism is the Iranian regime, then the only main party that can confront this phenomena and actually is in a way the antithesis to this Islamic fundamentalism is the Iranian regime's opposition movement. And that opposition movement is represented by the National Council of Resistance of Iran with the People's Mujahideen organization as its main backbone force. So I think it is very necessary to have this coalition supporting and uniting with the opposition movement of Iranian people as well as the opposition movement of people in Syria as well as the opposition movement, the genuine one, in Iraq and other countries.
We have two questions that we have received on Twitter. One question is, how exactly is Iran behind the rebels in Yemen? And do you think Iran will succeed in its plan to expand?
Well, we've had a lot of information that has been disclosed to the public that the Houthis, for at least over 1 year now, have been traveling back to Iran, and the Iranian regime's heads of Quds force, Qasem Soleimani, and other commanders of this regime's Revolutionary Guards department that actually is responsible for the extraterritorial operations of the Iranian regime's Revolutionary Guards, the Quds force, which is headed by Qasem Soleimani, for over a year have been in direct contact with each other. in Iran. They have been facilitated, they have been provided with various military equipments as well as armaments. The whole operation in order for the Houthis to actually attack the capital of Yemen in Sana'a has been planned by Quds Force and carried out by the Houthis and the mercenaries of Iranian regime in Yemen. We know at this stage that the main responsibility of Qasem Soleimani has become Yemen. He has been involved in expansion of terrorism and fundamentalism and the Quds Force of Iranian regime in various countries in the Middle East. But now his main priority is Yemen. The person that he is very much relying in Yemen as the head of Iranian regime forces that is responsible for operations there is called Amirian. He is actually this Brigadier General Pastor Amirian is about 50 years old. He's been in various actually operations and military attacks in Yemen himself, and he has led some of these operations in Yemen, and we know that this person to some extent has been involved in trying to run the same campaign in Bahrain. So it is very obvious for us that the decisive storm and the unity amongst the Gulf region countries is essential in order to defeat the Iranian regime's Quds Force and their mercenaries in Yemen. And we have no doubt that they can win, because we know that it is not the genuine demand of Yemenis people. We have the same experience in Iran, where they had the Revolutionary Guards, the Pasdaran, attacking Iranians as a military force, not a security force in Iran, but as an invader military force used against civilian, totally defenseless Iranian people for quite many years in order to stay in power in Iran. They are now resorting to the same tactics in Yemen and other countries in the region.
The next question is by EU reporter. The question is, what is the impact of nuclear agreement with the work of the opposition?
Well, I think the impact is, of course, one must be very careful in order not to be deceived once again by the mullahs. So our efforts would be to continue providing as many revelations over the secret nuclear program of Iranian regime and its operation. Because as I said before, we are very much for a nuclear-free Iran. We think the nuclear program of this regime is one of the most dangerous one, that is an enemy, a big harm to our national interest, to the national interest of all Iranian people, as well as it is a major threat for the Middle East stability, security, and peace. So the impact it would have is actually our effort being doubled to make sure that this regime does not and cannot have any means to obtain a nuclear bomb.
Okay, the next question that we have received is from Kuwaiti Daily As-Siyaseh. The question is, can Iranian women open a front against Iranian regime? And also the question is, have you coordinated with women NGOs to confront the Islamic fundamentalism?
Well, I have to say that I am personally very grateful to all the efforts of Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, President-elect of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, as a Muslim woman and the leader of this movement, the opposition movement, and the political coalition of the National Council of Resistance, which includes 5 major organizations and parties of Iranian people opposition and some around 520 dignitaries. 50% of its members are women. Because of Mrs. Rajavi's dedication, Maryam Rajavi, to the goal of equality, and that she sees this as a big benchmark to evaluate the extent of democratic values in every society and in every country. It is a goal that we strongly support, and as a result of all her efforts, it was on 7th of March, there was a huge gathering in Berlin. We had hundreds of women coming from various political parties, from different political countries, from actually different continents, 5 different continents of the world. We had these political dignitaries, politicians, women activists, human rights activists, the NGOs that came, all of them together to strongly support women's unity and a spread of this united front of women against particularly Islamic fundamentalism. And they said that the main obstacle on the way of democracy, human rights, and women's rights is misuse of Islam and fanaticism, extremism that tried to justify itself in the name of religion. So answering your question, this front is already been opened up, both in Iran and with the efforts of Iranian women and their dedication to this movement, particularly the efforts of Mrs. Maryam Rajavi, we have been able to build up this international front against Islamic fundamentalism. And of course, we will continue definitely to spread and to make it much stronger. But I do agree with you, and I think that women's rights is a benchmark to evaluate how democratic a country is, and also a secular government with separation of religion from the state is again another political step that, in my view, can give us the confidence and the assurance that that government would not lead into fundamentalism and would not be in various ways manipulated by the Iranian regime.
Thank you, Mrs. Nowrouzi. The next question is from Mrs. Najah Al-Zahrawi from Dunya Al-Watan website. Mrs. Zahrawi asks, what is the goal of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's activities in Bab al-Mandab?
Well, I think it is obviously their efforts to try to threaten both Yemenis, and the Iranian regime is actually very much scared. I think one of the issues I'm hoping to highlight in today's conference is the reaction of the regime's top officials in response to the decisive storm operation led by the Saudi Arabia. And I think they are terrified. They are caught with a big surprise and they are shocked. And they are trying by some actually efforts to pretend as if they have the upper hand in the Middle East, and in a way by their hollow propaganda to try to intimidate the Saudi Arabian government as well as other Arab nations in this coalition in order to retreat and in order to stop the continuation of their effort to free Yemen. But it is obvious that the coalition and this united front should not give in to any of these propagandas or any of the intimidation by this regime, and totally the opposite must strongly continue in order to obtain their objective, which is really to free Yemen and to cut off the Iranian regime hands from meddling into the affairs of Yemen, and we are hoping that they will continue with other countries as well, such as Syria and Iraq. We think that one of the most basic and essential solution to be able to challenge fundamentalism is the eviction of Iranian regime from meddling into the affairs of these countries. And of course, the major root of the problem is the overthrow of this regime by the efforts of Iranian people led by the opposition movement of Iranian people, the Mujahideen movement.
Mrs. Nowrouzi, the next question is from Mrs. Amal Allawi from Palestinian news agency Sula Press. The question is, would Iran's defeat in Yemen have an impact on its position in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon?
Definitely it would, because they're very much interconnected. And that is why we say that this action, this united, decisive platform by the Iraqi Gulf countries, by the Arab Gulf countries, with the leadership of Saudi Arabia, is of course very essential in the challenging the interferences of Iranian regime in the affairs of all these countries. I think seeing the devastation in Syria is very heartbreaking for all Muslims, for everyone in the Middle East, to see the cries of the children, to see tens of thousands of the civilian defenseless people, women, children in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, under the suppression of this regime, being massacred, killed, raped, or tortured. I think seeing all those cities being destructed, particularly by Bashar al-Assad dictator, which is bombing its own civilian cities. I think these are just the tip of the iceberg that shows us the great devastation and animosity of this very brutal regime in power in Iran that has supported and backed all these dictators and mercenaries in order to persuade its own interest in the Middle East. And the reason is because they know they have no popular support within Iran. They know that vast majority of Iranians hate that regime and want to overthrow it. But because of the repression and many years of, unfortunately, Western governments' wrong policy of appeasement, the mullahs, rather than being contained, have been encouraged and emboldened to continue atrocities in Iran and to continue devastation in the Middle East. I think they must be stopped. They can be stopped if we are all united, if we know that the main enemy is this regime behind dictators, behind mercenaries, that either because of money or because of power have done such an outrage crime against their own people. And it is time for them to be stopped.
Mrs. Nowrouzi, a couple of our viewers have asked, how can we get Iran out of Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and stop that regime from funding terror?
I think one is, of course, for them and any other country to support strongly the decisive operation by the Arab countries led by Saudi Arabia. I think it is the first time as a turning point that we will see the regional governments in the Middle East have decided to break their silence and take action. And I think they need to continue. We need to support them. We need to give them very strong message that it is not only Yemen, but also Syrian people, also the Iraqi people, and also the Iranian people that want to liberate their country, not only for development and progress for our future generations, but also for the whole peace and stability and tranquility with our sisters, brothers, neighbors in the whole of the Middle East. We have a lot of resources that could be used for progress rather than destruction. And I think if they are united to press hard for the world community to impose much harsher sanctions against Iranian regime and not to use this pretext or excuse of nuclear talks, in my view, as an excuse in order to ignore human rights violations in Iran, to ignore economic crisis in Iran, to ignore severe repression and the meddling of this regime into other Middle East countries, providing arms to them, providing and assisting them in their fight, taking their mercenaries into Iran for training and then returning them back to their original countries in order to be engaged in chaos and in attack against civilian people. I think these all must be stopped. We could all help together by exposing them, providing information, disseminating information for the media, as well as NGOs and various governments. We need together to hand expose this regime and build up this international front against Islamic fundamentalism that the heart of it beats in Iran with the Iranian regime and the mullahs. And we can win.
Jenny Low 17 asks, what role should US take in supporting Arab coalition against expansionism by the Iranian regime?
At the moment, they've been, as far as I have seen, politically very supportive of the efforts of all these countries in trying to challenge the mercenaries of Iranian regime and the Houthis that attacked the legitimate government in Yemen. But I think they need to go much, much more beyond. And I've seen statements by Mr. Ashton Carter, the defense minister, Secretary of Defense in the United States, having talks with its counterparts within the coalition. And they have been supportive and thinking of ways of accommodating them. And I think they need to play a much stronger role if they want not to be isolated by the people in the Middle East. I think it is time now for them to be much more active and much more supportive and in action to be able to decisively stand against Iranian regime many years of interferences and disruption and destruction in the Middle East.
Our next question is from one of our viewers that asks, is Qasem Soleimani's involvement in Yemen as broad as his involvement in Iraq?
Absolutely. The whole dossier of the Middle East countries' affairs with the Iranian regime has been in the hands of Qasem Soleimani as the head of Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard Pasdaran, Iranian regime Revolutionary Guards, has been in his hands. But at the moment, as I said, his priority is Yemen because it is very strategic for the mullahs and they are being defeated in Yemen. And if that defeat will continue, it would have its impact in the whole of Middle East with the Quds Force and its operation in Iraq, particularly with the Shiite militias, as well as the Badr, 9 Badr Corps and other terror groups that are being financed and supported by the Iranian regime Quds Force in Iraq, as well as their support for Bashar Assad forces in Syria. So everywhere they would definitely receive a big blow. I have to add actually this recent remarks by Khamenei, the supreme religious leader of the Mullah, that in a gathering of the Iranian regime's armed forces on the occasion of so-called Army Day in Iran, Khamenei warned all of his armed forces to be ready. And he said that one of the most important, in addition to these forces reorganizing themselves and their military facilities, is their morale. And they need to boost their morale to be able to win whatever circumstances that might arise. And so we need to be warned and ready. So it is obvious that the regime from top to bottom has been very scared and terrified of the advancement of the decisive storm operation in Yemen and the Middle East. And that is why they're very much trying and hoping and persuading or pressuring this coalition to stop the war and come to so-called peaceful negotiation with the Houthis. And one have to say that the war started first by the Iranian regime mercenary, not the coalition. And it is now over 12 years that they have waged this unbalanced, unfair war against defenseless civilians in different countries in the Middle East, and it is time for them to be stopped.
Another question from Italian news agency ANSA. The question is, the issue of migrants in the Middle East has become a catastrophe. Can you elaborate in this regard?
Yes, I think it is absolutely right. It is a catastrophe. And I think particularly the most heartbreaking is to see 11 million Syrians being homeless and refugees in various parts of the world. And unfortunately, we have seen how many of these refugees, including their children, have been very badly mistreated by people like Hezbollah in Lebanon because of their subordination to the Iranian regime. So I have to say it is heartbreaking. Our hope and our message and our effort to try to help with them in many various ways that everybody can, particularly as Muslim brothers, sisters, and if they are from other denominations as well, whether Christians or Jews coming from all these countries, I think definitely the hands of giving and helping and aiding them is a responsibility to everyone in all these countries, in all the neighbors that can accommodate them in any way possible. And I think that it is a shame and embarrassment for the United States, for the Western countries, that despite all this devastation, we see still no-fly zone area is being rejected by the Soviet Union, and by the Russian government. And I think it is a huge embarrassment, a shame for the world community to stand and to see that all these defenseless civilians can be brutally bombarded every day, huge number of casualties, as well as huge number of people that are refugees because actually they have lost everything they've had. So they need the help. And in addition to that help, I think we need to pressure the world community for accepting the no-fly zone in Syria and preventing the dictator Bashar Assad to continue bombing its own people in all those areas that for the past 4 years this brutal dictator has ruthlessly have continued destroying and making huge misery for all men and women and children in Syria. So this is, in my view, a better strategic way to try to prevent people from becoming homeless and refugees.
The next question is from Mona Al-Jabouri from the Iraqi website Ketabat. She asks, is there any relationship between meddling by the Iranian regime in Yemen and the ongoing nuclear talks?
Obviously, what we can see is that there is a relation which is very negative, because often, unfortunately, we have seen Western powers, the P5+1, is sticking to this so-called agreement, and on the other hand, forgetting or ignoring huge crisis that actually is this devastation in the Middle East by Iranian regime's interferences in all these countries. So what we think is that the world community needs to pressure P5+1 that would include human rights as well as a stop of supporting terrorism and export of fanaticism and fundamentalism by the Iranian regime to the other countries, particularly Middle East countries. So in our view, those two major issues must be included in whatever of nuclear talks between P5+1 with the Iranian regime.
We have another question from Ezra Media. I think you have already responded to this question, but you may have more to add. The question is, how can we get Iran out of Iraq, Syria, and Yemen, and try to stop the Iranian regime from funding terrorism in these countries?
Well, as I said, first of all, in order to do the first primary thing is actually to evict and cut off the hands of Iranian regime from meddling into these countries. And that means definitely for the world powers, especially the United States, the Iraqi government, the Syrians. In the case of Iraq, it is actually for that government to distance itself in all various ways from the Iranian regime. That means they have to actually call for an inclusive government in Iraq and be engaged in reconciliation with all other political parties, particularly the Sunni tribes, the sheikhs, Sunni sheikhs throughout and tribes in all various regions. All of the demands they have from the Iraqi government must be fulfilled. Their prisoners must be released. The political prisoners must be released. Throughout all these negotiations, the true Sunni leaders, the Sunni tribes, must play their own role within the government. They must have their own influence and their own leaders taking part in that government, and must be some balance, and there definitely needs to be a democratic election that would engage all Sunnis in the construction of Iraq, and it should be a real true coalition government. And definitely a separation of religion, and particularly any sectarian approach within the government in Iraq is essential. So we think obviously the government in Iraq must distance itself from particularly people such as Maliki or the Iranian regime that for many years have been engaged in trying to continue the sectarian war between so-called Sunnis and Shiites But we know it has nothing to do with religion. It is unfortunately a pretext or some sort of a cover that beneath it, what they do is plundering the wealth of Iraqi people, but trying to somehow get them involved or to some extent diverting attention to this sectarian war. In the case of Yemen, as I said, it is to continue for the legitimate government of Abed Mansour Hadi and its whole government to come back to power. And of course, it is up to Yemeni people then to decide for the way they want to run their country. But obviously, we need the total eviction of the mercenaries of Iranian regime and their surrender and defeat in Yemen. So this is the way, and we continue the support of this decisive operation, decisive storm operation. In the case of what other country did you mention? It was Iraq, Syria. In the case of Syria, of course, our view is that we strongly need to support the Syrian people's opposition. And Bashar Assad must go with no other exception. He must go. He's responsible. He needs to be put into trial and international criminal court to face justice for all the crimes he committed, for huge executions and murder and killing of all these civilians. He's been responsible for killing of at least some over 200,000 Syrian people. Obviously, he's one of the worst criminals of the world. So that's the way to do it. After his overthrow, the Syrian people's opposition needs to go through a democratic process of having a transitional period and under the auspices of international community to go ahead with a general election for forming a democratic government to run their country peacefully and with justice.
Next question is from Ash-Sharq newspaper from Saudi Arabia. The question is, how do you assess Tehran's reaction to decisive storm and defeat of Houthis? Do you think it is a start of Iran's defeat in the region?
Yes, obviously it is the start. It is a very decisive start of the Iranian regime's defeat in Yemen. I think the reaction, I mentioned Khamenei's, the supreme religious leader of the mullahs, remarks in the Day of Army, alarming and giving a notice to everyone, warning their forces to be ready. There was other actually remarks, if I may, one of them by the head and the commander of the ground forces of the Iranian regime, which Ahmad Reza Purdastan. He again was very shocked. He had threatened the Saudi Arabian government, saying that if you continue with this operation, you will see explosions and missile attacks in various cities in Saudi Arabia, which is again such blatant threatening of the Saudi Arabian government by top officials of that regime is the best indication that how they are terrified and how this operation has been successful, and shows that this is the right response against Iranian regime's aggression to Yemen. Again, if I may share with you other regime's remarks, other officials of the Iranian regime's remarks, I can refer to Golpayegani, Mohammadi Golpayegani, the head of the Supreme Religious Leader Office, and he says it is time now. The downfall of the Saudi government and the Saudi family has started. So that's how they're responding. And again, they will continue to say For instance, Hassan Rouhani had said that if the operation does not stop, then the coalition must understand that the consequences of all these operations will be returned back to these governments themselves, to Saudi Arabia and other regional countries that have joined together. And in addition, again, Larijani has been warning the Saudi Arabian government, saying that if you continue with the operation, you would be facing God's actually cursing you, and you would be seeing that everyone will continue hating you in the Middle East. So actually, again, the remarks are very indicative that the coalition is in the right track.
The next question is again from Ashar newspaper. The question is, do you think with nuclear agreement, the mullahs' hope for obtaining nuclear bomb will stop and vanish?
Of course, I have to say, so long as the mullahs do have the ability for enrichment of uranium, they have built a lot of secret tunnels in various parts of Iran, which even according to the top officials of the regime, they have digged hundreds of meters down the ground in order to build up these tunnels, or in the middle of mountains. And no one is stupid to spend billions of dollars for building and constructing such sites for only nothing, and only for enrichment of uranium. We are not foolish, we are not naive, and I think it is obvious, knowing the nature of the Iranian regime, they would never give in trying to obtain a nuclear bomb unless if they are in the weakest position, and that means if the world community imposes much more harsher sanctions. That is the only condition you may see that the Iranian regime will come transparent in trying to expose all its secret nuclear program. You have seen last week there was talks by a delegation going from International Atomic Energy Agency to have talks with the Iranian regime's representative in this agency. In the talks they had in Tehran, after one day, at the end of the day, it was a big failure, and none of the questions regarding the military aspect of the regime's secret nuclear program was disclosed by that regime's official to the Energy Atomic Agency. So I think there was even not any other time designated or provided to the world community or the media regarding their next talks. And that means that the mullahs continue playing with the International Atomic Energy Agency and not providing any information over the secret military use and military aspect of their nuclear operation in Iran, especially using lasers in order to enrich uranium, and very highly explosives that they have used in Parchin and in other places that they have not allowed for the agency to visit. And also, to add to it, it was remarks by Hossein Salami, and he is the deputy to the Iranian regime's Revolutionary Guards Jafari, and he says anyone and any party that requests to want to see military sites of this regime because they are suspected to any nuclear operation or activity in these sites would receive our very warm bullet, and in return that's how we will respond to them. And he said that it would be a treason of our national interest if any of our diplomats would agree with the international community the additional protocol and giving them the access to see our military sites that are under the suspicious of nuclear program or nuclear activity. So it is obvious for us that it is very risky to come to any sort of reliable agreement with this regime over the nuclear issue.
The next question is regarding Christians. And a couple of our viewers asked, is Iranian regime responsible for targeting of Christians in the proxy wars it is involved in?
Knowing that it is the Iranian regime behind these mercenaries in different countries, I have no doubt that whether directly or indirectly, they are definitely involved. We've seen more or less similar approach they had to the Christian community in Iran, to the Sunni community in Iran, the animosity and the repression, executions of their active members and their communities, and all the time suppression and threatening them in Iran is the best indication that they are coming from the same family and from the same root. And I have no doubt that directly and indirectly they are involved in suppression of the Christian communities by their mercenaries in these countries as well.
One of our viewers has asked, what is the next likely country that Iran regime would target with proxy forces?
According to information we have, they have started again their mercenaries and their contacts and connection in Bahrain. And we have disclosed that how they try by building up centers, religious guidance centers, or under the pretext of exchanging Islamic culture or providing some financial or other type of accommodation for poor families, and they, under the excuse of building some of the charities in these countries, they try to create their contacts, or even under the pretext of sending their pilgrims for holy places and holy shrines in different countries. They try to somehow intervene, but they misuse all those institutions, and behind the scene they will try to send their intelligence agents in order to recruit Muslim communities and members. Often they send them back to Iran in the mullahs mercenaries in Qom under the pretext of Islamic teachings, but then later when they are back to their countries, they will build up these centers in order to accommodate the Iranian regime Quds force.
The next question that we have received is from Bill Ringel. The question is, what is the role of June 13 meeting on Western policy?
I think it is, of course, in my view, very significant. The huge grand gathering of all Iranian communities coming from all over Europe, as well as Canada, Australia, the United States, and many other parts of the world, 5 major continents of the world, in my view, would be a show of power, a show of force, and also it would be an example of a united front, which is very extensive, that wants the overthrow of this regime as the godfather of terrorism, international terrorism, and also the epicenter of Islamic fundamentalism, and that this grand gathering wants international community to be united in fight against Islamic fundamentalism, for democracy in Iran, toppling of this regime, and going towards huge democracy and human rights in Iran. And of course, I have no doubt that later in the Middle East we will see the effects of it. If I may also use the opportunity and the chance to mention that it is obviously very essential for all the viewers, whether Iranian or coming from other parts of the world, to join with us in this very grand gathering over these major issues. And the goals that this huge gathering is highlighting. Last year there were over 600 politicians, former top officials of the United States government, as well as many hundreds of members of parliament coming from different countries in Europe as well as other parts, many human rights and women's rights activists, that all of them joined together coming from 69 countries. They joined hand in hand to make a very strong remark and message to the world community that they are for Mrs. Mariam Rajavi's third option, which is an essential change of this regime and establishment of democracy, human rights and women's rights in Iran, and that we want a pluralistic, democratic government in Iran with separation of religion from the state. And of course, we want a nuclear-free Iran, and we want to establish tranquility, peace, stability with our neighbors, and hopefully development and progress to overcome in the whole of the Middle East. So I will encourage everyone to take part in this grand gathering and to make this united front much stronger, and also convey this message to others.
Thank you, Mrs. Nowrouzi. Thank you for attending our live question and answer about the failure of the Iranian regime. It is in its regional expansionism and its consequences at home, and the right policy. We have received many questions. Please allow us to respond to them on Twitter.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me for today's conference, and thank you from everyone that participated so far, and I hope that I was able to respond to all the questions you had. Thank you very much.